Good afternoon. Was Haman the world's first recorded communist dictator? We Jews just observed the holiday of Purim, in which there's a chain of events. We read the Megillah, or it's in the book of in the Christian Bible. It's called the Book of Esther, where there is a chain of events in ancient Persia by which this man Haman comes to power. Who determines to annihilate the Jewish people throughout the empire of Persia. It's a fascinating story of how there's a great deal of intrigue in terms of how he's undone, and his plot is uncovered and destroyed by Esther's actions, Esther being the queen. But what's striking to me is that he wanted to confiscate all of the property of the Jewish people. The Jewish people of Persia had become prosperous, as we often do in a host country, because of our values, our family values, our business values, our ability to pull ourselves up from the bootstraps in situations often of great adversity, and our creativity, our ability to think outside the box. And thus we had become, I guess, what you might call middle class. And Haman, who came along, in a sense, tapped into the envy of the people of Persia. They have something you don't have. It's unfair. We're going to redistribute the wealth. We're going to make everything equal. There shouldn't be any inequality. One person shouldn't have more than another person. It's just somehow not fair. Why that is, they never explain. But he expected to tap into these emotions when he convinced the king to issue a decree calling for the annihilation of all the Jewish people and the confiscation of their property, as I said. In a sense, it was what we've seen today from every communist revolution, whether it be from Lenin or from Hitler or from anywhere else. If you listen to the rhetoric of American politicians like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, they talk about, corporate greed and, millionaires and billionaires, as if there's something somehow sinister about owning private property. And with the idea of stirring up in people that kind of envy that would give them political support. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're communists necessarily. And in this country, we have such a strong tradition and appreciation of the genuine progressive nature of private ownership, more so than any country in history, society, that they're not going to become communists, likely. But Ahasuerus let his government fall under the sway of Haman, who was the first conscious communist, who was the first leader to actually try to implement a communist program. It doesn't mean he was the world's first communist literally. I mean, communism goes back to Adam and Eve. None other than Friedrich Engels, the capitalist financier of Karl Marx, talked about primitive socialism, when man had not yet become aware of his ability to own property, to think on his own, to have his own identity, to have a belief in a creator of the universe outside of the manipulation of the graven image, the idol. And thus you had primitive socialism. So socialism is something that's always existed in nature. It goes all the way back. It's the worship of man without God, as Whittaker Chambers put it. But I'm not talking about that kind of socialism, which of course exists in primitive societies. I'm talking about the conscious, literal conduct, the edict of a socialist, leftist, communist dictator. And that's where we discover Haman. And to my way of thinking, that is a primary lesson of the holiday of Purim, one that's often overlooked, but one that we ought to look at, and we ought to take very seriously today. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody.